Kelly Doyle,
Barbara Gray,
Wanga William,
Tara Goro,
Andrea Perlman,
George Perlman.
My name is Kelly Doyle. I'm from St. Johnsbury, Vermont, born in Montpelier, Vermont. I started creating art probably early when 3 or 4 years old. My mom was an art teacher and always had materials around, paints, leftover pads of paper, things like that. So I was kind of always watching her do her supply orders and getting supplies together for her classroom. I always did art growing up. I did start doing photography classes in high school, which then led me to, I guess I became an art minor in college. I was a French major, so I didn't really keep doing art until junior, senior year at UVM. And then I did go to art school for photography and began painting more and incorporating photographs with mark making, painting on top of it, and collaging as well. And then picking up the sewing part, which is totally self-taught from a book.
So talk a little bit about working with textiles and upholstery.
I began sewing clothing first for people, kind of custom pieces, one of a kind. And then when I left New York after art school to the San Francisco Bay Area, I had created a portfolio for sewing, and I wanted to just kind of dive in there and wanted more hands-on medium, since photography still was chemical, but there was some more digital things happening. So I walked into an upholstery shop and said, "Can I work here? I want to apprentice." And they said, "All right, well, we'll try you out. If a dog likes you, you can stay," basically. And so I was there for 5 years, learning everything about the trade and basically the sewing aspect in the upholstery shop. So everything sewn, and as well as draperies, window treatments, bedding, and all that. I started doing handmade books, so that got me into like documentary photography, to hand making the books with the paper and fiber, collaging, as well as sewing the books together. And then I started just taking things and doing little projects, card making for people's birthday or whatever, painting, adding the painting in, as well as the on paper and collage with the photos. And I'm trying to think when the banners came. It was probably when I moved back to Vermont. I was looking at, interested in banners with the dowels, and kind of, it's a graphic, but mixed in with the painting. And so I started saying, you can do anything on a fabric, and, sewing paper, sewing pieces on it, and as well as painting. And then I used pieces of fabric from older slip covers and things like that, which were, 15 yards of fabric cut up. You can sew it back together, make a big panel, and then started doing, painting larger pieces, which kind of didn't evolve until I probably got a bigger studio like 7 years ago. I've always kind of, living in New York especially, you see the waste. If you ever go to the landfill, it's 7 miles long, and it's just trash everywhere. Like before trash day, it's just like New York. And I lived in Brooklyn, but it was crazy. So that was kind of like, why don't people use this stuff? I mean, it doesn't take that much more labor. I mean, I guess on a mass scale it would, but custom pieces. So I started experimenting with that, especially with upholstery, because you're taking like a 100-year-old piece and you're trying to transition it or transform it, especially with new fabric, to a brand new piece. So that was part of that, seeing the process of the upholstery, taking it down to the frame that you could salvage, and then building it back up with new materials. So it's kind of like the play of the new in the old, but yeah, not just discarding the whole thing, like taking it apart and kind of seeing what's interesting about it, and then getting influenced by the materials there, like a coil. It's got that nice spiral shape. It's kind of playing off that. Even though if I wasn't using, I've never used metal in my paintings, but
not yet.
Not yet. Yeah, right. I've always been interested in animals. I had a little art show in first grade where I painted, it was like a whole case of every, owls, birds, I guess the animals that I grew up with kind of in a rural Vermont in the 70s, cows and things like that, and they were all in a case, as well as I used to look at a lot of animal picture books and encyclopedias. And I think that still carries over today with the great horned owl and the pike, which actually that would be an influence. My husband's a fly fisherman. It's like the stories I hear about all the fishing adventures. Yeah, so it's, I guess, a mix and match of taking things that around me as well as the stories that I hear.
Is there a particular piece of work that is in the show right now that you would like to tell people about? Yeah,
there is that, it's the eyeball in Tiny Town with a big eye in the center, surrounded by the houses and kind of in a graphic doodle form. It was kind of a different piece for me since I had changed over materials to like a finer surface. And I was able to get a finer lines, finer shapes, and able to render the items a little bit more carefully. And so that was kind of a mixture of maybe some doodle art that I used to do in high school. It kind of came back to me when I was working on this piece, as long with the bright color that I had been doing with the other pieces. So I really like that piece. Good combination of a lot of different styles, different directions that I could go in at any given point. This kind of came together for me, so enjoy that piece.
I'm Barbara Gray, and I'm from Peacham. I've lived there for about 30 years. I have a master's degree in art, and it's in fiber art. I got that at the University of Georgia. I worked primarily on the loom, and I did three-dimensional work as opposed to a rug or placemats or something. I did the front end of a church. I had several commissions that were pieces that are now in the collection of universities like in Atlanta and so forth. And I had a large number of exhibits around the country and outside of it.
Tell us about your journey to become a painter.
When I moved to Peacham, I met a few local people, of course, and several of us decided to go to Italy and learn to paint. And I thought that would be wonderful fun to do. I joined the group. There were 4 of us. That was my introduction to painting plein air. Plein air painting is just painting outdoors in the natural elements. And I found that really exciting. One, the light doesn't stay the same. And so you move around with it. And you have to do it pretty fast because it moves, it changes. So pieces that you do, like this one that was done standing on the beach, and there were people walking around and doing things in front of me, and that's what plein air is.
How do you paint plein air and paint in the studio? Do you finish the painting in the studio? How is the...
Many people do. They do finish them, and occasionally I will do that. My studio happens to be wherever I am. So it could be in my kitchen, it could be in the car. I can finish a painting on site or take a look at it when I get home and decide, oh, I need to make a change here or there. Those things happen. Mm-hmm. Mostly the influences are what's outside of me, what I'm looking at. It's kind of exciting to go out and interpret what you see, which you have to do, but it's the way it affects you. So because you're outdoors and enjoying it, that affects how you see what you're doing. So that's an influence.
Tell us a little bit about painting and being an artist in Vermont.
I don't know how it is to be an artist anywhere. You do what you do, you enjoy doing what you do, or you wouldn't be doing it. You share it as much as you can, because after all, what are you going to do with all that stuff? And that's why we have exhibits. It's so that other people can enjoy what you do.
Would you tell us about this particular painting here?
I had taken my family to Acadia Park. This is Sandy Beach in the park. It was a beautiful day, and I was standing there on the beach, upper side of the beach, and there were people occasionally climbing up the rocks, and a lot of people in the water. It was just a beautiful day. What's interesting is that this painting, I notice, has a few knife marks. You can paint with a brush, most artists do, or you can paint with a knife, which is what you mix paint with. And there are places where you can see where I put the knife to the canvas, and other places where obviously you didn't, where it was all brushwork. More and more, as my vision decreases, I paint with a knife because I can see what I'm doing, sort of. It's an interesting transition to go from the original way with the brushes into knife work. And it's amazing how many different kinds of marks you can make with a knife. So it works out for itself.
My name is Wanga William. I'm from Uganda, 39 years old, an artist and also a sportsman.
Tell us about learning to paint and how it inspired you to go to school for art.
Like when I was very young, we had some guy who was an artist in our neighborhood. He used to draw illustrations, so I used to spend most of my time with him and got so much into art, and also started drawing like at a very young age, and also painting. Mostly I used to draw like people, and because he used to do illustrations, I used to try and do whatever he does. So I grew up wanting to do art, and with time I started getting into doing like sculptures and things. Like after, when I started studying, I picked interest and had to go to an art school. I majored in sculpture and painting mostly. I do like semi-abstract. I don't do so much abstract, but I do realism and semi-abstract. I don't do so much abstract.
Do you have any particular artistic influences that have directed you?
Normally, like things around me, like I'm driven with things I see. Landscapes, animals, activities around, that's what I always paint from whatever I see. Normally, like when I travel, like go up country or move around, I see animals and I want to paint them, and I normally paint things I've seen or things I see. Most of the time, I'm not doing anything. I'm always painting almost every day, but I paint for a few hours and do other things, but I almost paint every day. I started sculpturing at a young age with clay. It's still my favorite material, like making sculptures with clay. Though I make sculptures with cement and other materials like paper, but clay is still my best media.
Have you found it challenging to work with clay? Here?
Here is a bit, because I've not yet got to use clay. Like here I've made some sculptures out of paper, but I've not got into clay yet, because clay is a bit, it has more work. You have to burn, and you have to, it's a bit heavy compared to paper or other materials. So with time maybe I'll make some clay pieces, but I've not done any yet around here.
Tell us a little bit about what it's like being an artist now that you're in Vermont.
Since like compared to where I come from, it's most of the times it's very cold here, and summer gets so warm, like it's always better for me to be indoor and work from there when it's cold, and I just be inside the house and do my paintings. There is a painting of a boy riding a bicycle, like a big bicycle down. Like in Uganda when we were growing up, we never used to have these small bicycles for young kids. So we had the same size of bicycles. So you used to start riding the bicycle from down. When you grow taller, you go up to when you reach the height of sitting on the seat of the bike. So I like that painting so much because it brings back those memories of me learning how to ride the bicycle.
Is there anything else that you would like to share or that you think we should know about?
Yeah, maybe apart from painting, I'm a sportsman. I'm always rowing. I row and started a rowing club back in Uganda, which is called Kampala Rowing Club, which I coach. Even when I'm still this side, I still coach it, and yeah, I'm so involved in rowing and art. Yeah, I've been in several regattas around.
Tarragoro, St. Johnsbury, Vermont.
So tell us a little bit about when you first started creating art.
I was young and I lived in a rural place and there were a lot of kids around, so I would, and my dad was a stay-at-home dad. I was very lucky. I would just basically draw all day and he would give me constructive criticism. I remember like a very exciting day for me would be if someone brought home markers or something and I would just basically like use them up in a week, just drawing monsters. I really like to draw monsters.
Did you decide to study art in school?
Eventually, yes. I went to the University of British Columbia to study environmental sciences. During my junior year, I went on a year abroad to New Zealand, where I found myself just drawing throughout class instead of taking notes. And I decided that instead of doing a lot of data entry, I wanted to make art. So I enrolled in a art college for a year and did a foundations year, and then ran out of money and came back to Vermont, where I went to Johnson State, where they have an awesome art program, NVU now. And they had a fabulous art teacher named Ken Leslie, or they still do. And he really ignited my passion for painting and encouraged me a lot.
When did you start to go in the direction of creating murals?
So that actually started in high school. Well, it might have started before. My dad sometimes volunteered for local theater companies to just paint sets. And I remember when I was like 6 or 7, just watching him paint a set for Into the Woods. And I just remember being really close up to the painting and seeing these huge brush strokes and not knowing what he was doing. And then stepping back and seeing a huge tree. And I was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. So I really actually wanted to start out doing theater sets. And so my dad humored me and he bought me this huge canvas. So I could like make my own theater backdrop, even though like I never had a theater company or anything. I was 7 years old. But I actually never used it, but I always wanted to do theater sets. I think I have it as a drop cloth now, but in high school they do, I think the freshmen do like a volunteer day. And my volunteer day was painting in the basement of NVRH. So that was, I think, my first like mural where they just let me go to town on a wall and I painted like a landscape, and then half of the day was supposed to be sports and I asked to just stay the whole day painting. That was fun and people liked it because it was kind of a drab basement. And then for my senior capstone at the academy, I did public art, so I painted a thing at the Kiwanis pool. They wanted a mural and I think it's still there, you can see it from the highway. And when I was studying at UBC in Vancouver, I wasn't doing art. I think I tried to apply or get into some art classes, but they denied me. When I would go out at night just on my own accord skateboarding, there was this really big parking garage near my dorm, and I would take oil pastels and just draw on the walls. And I left a huge box of oil pastels out, kind of tucked up on the wall. People started coming and just started drawing on the walls with me, and just like out of the blue, we were just skating and drawing, and it became this really, like, we started to cover like 2 floors with just crazy art. And I tried to make it into a club so it, like, we could be officially recognized by the school. But that alerted the campus security as to who it was who was doing it, so I got in trouble instead of getting any sort of club going. And they promptly painted over everything in gray, but it was fun, and it made me really want to just draw on walls or paint on walls. It's nice to be invited to paint on walls now. The way I started doing murals as a job was when I was in college at Johnson State. My professor, Ken Leslie, knew somebody, and one of his old students worked at High Mowing Seeds in Walcott, and they have this big warehouse and where they also sort seeds. And he had mentioned to his art teacher, hey, if you ever have an artist or a student who wants to come and make our walls brighter, send them our way and we'll pay for materials. So that's what happened. The previous student who worked there now then hooked me up. I painted on the walls, and then from there it was kind of a network of meeting different farmers and people in kind of the Northeast Kingdom who had big, maybe industrial kind of farm places that could use a little brightening up. So I met Pete Johnson from Pete's Greens, and Mateo Keeler from Jasper Hill, and Linda Ramsdell from the Galaxy Bookshop. And so I just started painting from just like word of mouth, and eventually I started charging. They invited me to charge them. Sometimes it was barter. Johnson hooked me up with so much food. He gave me like a CS. He fed me for like a year and a half. It was awesome. Eventually I answered a call to artists for City Market, and luckily not many people had applied to that, so I got my shoe in the door, and they seemed to like my style, so they invited me back to keep painting for them for a while at their new store as well, recent store in the South End. So
has it been a challenge to creating work with your own vision and passion behind it, but also working like on a commissioned piece? How do you balance those two things? It's
a constant struggle, that's for sure. It's funny because sometimes I'll do something that's not quite my style just because I have an availability, I need the money or something. Like recently I did a postcard mural in Stowe, and I'm really not good with lettering, but she trusted me. She said, like, I like your style, can you do like this postcard mural? So after that, I got a few requests for like very minimalistic lettering stuff, which is super not my style at all. Like, I'm a maximalist. I do like layers, and I like to have all sorts of people happening, like doing things. It's a narrative usually for me. And so people looked at that and said, oh good, you can like do lettering, and I really can't. So it is funny, like when I started out, I'm capable of toning it down and doing the minimalist stuff. It's challenging, and I don't feel like I can be myself. I can't really put my own soul into it. It's more like tracing or on a big scale. I'm a little conflicted about it because while it's money, I'm capable of it. It's like, I don't know if it's worth it to me right now. So yeah, it is a struggle. I always was worried about going into art because I was afraid that it would become work, and it has. I haven't really done my own art for a long time. I find other creative ways of expression that isn't painting. I do have a lot of ideas for paintings that I just, so far I can't really bring myself to put brush to canvas because I feel a little burnt out right now. I've been doing it for full-time for almost 10 years, and I don't know, I feel like I have to break through something and, find my own voice again, back like I was in the parking garage, just doing whatever I wanted. But it is hard being trained in a way, like not through art school, but through just livelihood, that, I almost feel like it's hard for me to paint without a prompt or a paycheck right now, and just doing it and then not having anyone to show it to or give it to. I'm very unsure of my abilities, actually. Like, you'd think that like painting murals for 10 years, I'd be like, oh, like I'm awesome or something, I don't know. Or like I'm capable. And like in a way I know that I'm capable, but if I do something for myself, I'm just like, oh, people might not like it. And but I also need to like break through that barrier of not really caring and just doing it for myself. So it is a constant struggle. I don't know, I haven't really got there yet. It's interesting working with kids because they have incredible imaginations, and they have this like highly elevated imagination, but then actually like the actual skill and the muscle memory of actually holding a paintbrush and making it do what you want to do, they're not like at the same level, right? So it is a lot of discovery for actually anyone. I mean, not just kids, but anyone who hasn't held a brush in their hand for longer than a few hours throughout their life. I try and design the projects so that they're able to explore. So for the St. J mural at the school, I did a lot of outlining, and so then they could fill in colors, kind of like a big painting coloring book. And similarly to mosaic, I used different pieces of paper and fabric that they could just go crazy on, and then we could incorporate those images and patterns into the mural in kind of like a decoupage kind of way, just like gluing them in and cutting them out and gluing them in. Restraint is difficult for kids who are, K through 2. I think in 3rd grade they start to be a little more restrained. Some 2nd graders are amazing at like making sure that they're not painting over the hard work of somebody else. So I really like to, let them paint off canvas and then put that on. It saves me from policing it too much, because that can like really be a buzzkill. Mm-hmm. And like, I think art should be fun and have like be a party kind of mentality. So yeah, with the mosaic, they just they listened to music and painted patterns on pieces of paper, and then I glued them into a composition. That was fun because it gave them a little bit of liberty, and it also gave me, all of this information and all of these colors to work with that I wouldn't have come up with them by myself. And same with the St. J school mural, like kids were painting whatever they wanted, like ATVs, and I learned a lot about Doctor Who because they were painting like the TARDIS. I think one kid painted like 3 TARDISes, and he's actually in my after school group right now, and he's like continuing to do that. There's some amazing talent there. It's hard sometimes to get them to do exactly what you want them to do in the moment. Like murals are a different concept. It's really a team sport. As much as I want to like honor the individual artist in each kid, it's also like, okay, but we also have to collaborate and like look at the big picture. I guess it's good training for life. So.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with us? Anything we should know about?
I think there should be murals everywhere in St. J. There are so many walls, just so many buildings that could really, I don't know, I'm not sure if some land owners or building owners understand like the impact that they could have by allowing somebody to paint a mural or paying somebody to paint a mural on it. I understand it's also kind of an interesting climate. Without the COVID money that is being injected into a lot of education or educational institutions right now, there really isn't a lot of money for art right now. So you find that, I'm finding that a lot of private landowners and business owners just do not have the budget, whereas schools have a little more of a budget, and community collaborations could really, well, murals really lend themselves to community collaborations because they're so big, and you can actually cover a lot of ground with a lot of hands helping, and all of those hands helping then have a stake in that piece of art and in that street corner or in that part of the community. So it's just like kind of a beautiful collaboration thing where you feel ownership of your community and you feel like you belong and like you've made an effort and made it a better place. There's so much opportunity for that right now, and I'm trying to get the word out about that. I hope that people aren't afraid to paint their walls, because it can always be painted over.
Okay, I'm Andrea Perlman from Johnson, Vermont.
I'm George Perlman, also Johnson, Vermont.
When I was a kid, and then when I went to high school, I was aware of other people being very good, and I didn't think I was good, so I kind of put my art away for a while. And my sister, when it came time to apply to college, she got an application for Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, and I sent it in and I got in, and it never really died, it was always there, but I just didn't participate. So when I went to Pratt, I was all in and learned how to swim with everybody else and not be so looking at everybody else, and took a while, but to do my own thing, and there's not one way to do art, and yeah, it took a while to find it. And so I guess seriously when I went to college, and my 20s. And really took off when we moved to Vermont. We met at Pratt, and we moved to Vermont in the mid-'70s because we actually met somebody at Pratt, a professor who lived in Vermont, and we studied with him for many years afterwards, even after the college years were over. Yeah.
Same sort of story. As a young child, I always was doing art, and grew up doing art. Graduated from high school, went to Parsons School of Design for a year, and then I ended up also at Pratt Institute and studied at Pratt with Jim. Also did my master's at Brooklyn College. But our major studying was with Jim.
James Gahagan.
James Gahagan,
we should give
who's
him,
up here in Woodbury, Vermont.
He's passed away about 20 years ago.
We came, he opened a school here called the Dome School. We built a geodesic dome.
In East Calais, Woodbury.
In East Calais, yeah, Woodbury. And I came up the first year they opened and helped them get set up and participated in the first sessions. And then the next year, I think Andrea came up and was in that second group. And so after that, we just started coming back to Vermont. And then I think in, 75 or 76, we moved up permanently. And we've been here ever since.
But James Gahagan and his wife, Pat DiGorgoza, was the draw that got us up here. And I think there was quite a bunch of artists that were drawn to Vermont because of them. He worked at Goddard for a while, and a very, very huge influence on us. And yeah.
So when you were studying at Pratt and then moving to Vermont, was that painting that you were doing primarily?
Yeah, it was painting. That's what. Yeah. And Jim was a painter, and he basically taught painting. His wife Pat was a sculptor, and she actually taught sculpture, and they both taught at Goddard at the time.
And during those years, I was going towards abstraction, and when when you go into abstraction, you know, you have questions like, is this meaningful? Is this good? And so James Gahagan was really a guide for us, and for many people, whether you were a realist or were abstract painter, you know, what he taught us really set the guidelines for us to go ahead and create. When I'm going like this, I'm thinking about one of his most basic teachings was, you know, that the canvas has 4 sides, and that as soon as you make a mark, you're breaking you can join in anytime, the surface, and then you create a problem, and how to solve that problem. I had lots and lots of failed paintings. And also, when our kids were young, I didn't have much time, so in the 70s, or maybe it was more like the 80s, I found this book about rug hooking. And I started rug hooking. At first, I was doing the punch method, and then I started doing the more traditional method where you take strips of wool, of fabric, and you use those for composition. And at least if the piece was failed, you could still walk on it. You know, it was a rug. Whereas paintings, you know, you just have them in your studio. You know, they line up, and you know, so anyways, they complement each other. Sometimes one influences the rugs, and then sometimes you get some material and you're hooking, and it influences the painting in reverse. So I still do both, and then mostly in the winter I do the rug hooking.
What are some things about Vermont or that you use as inspiration for your work?
Let's see. Well, I guess everything. Just in Vermont, you just got to step out the door, right? I can't really pinpoint. I know that nature is huge. I wonder how you could really just pinpoint when you're in front of an easel, what inspires you. I find that that I have to, some people, if they're sad or angry, they get it out on their canvas. I have to be kind of in a good place to work on a painting. But my inspiration, I guess, is just the beauty of nature. So wherever I am, you know, just taking it in. And yeah, I don't really know exactly what my psychological influences would be, but I definitely know it's wherever I go, you know,
Yeah, right.
beauty of nature.
I'm an abstract painter as well, but I've been recently just doing some studies from nature and abstracting them, you know, because we come from a background of visual plasticity, which is a basis of abstraction, where two-dimensional painting becomes a three-dimensional, you know, experience, and that's part of what we have learned from Jim. So I've been going out in the landscape and drawing, and then coming back and interpreting into paintings somewhat. But it's all there, whether you're a realist painter or an abstract painter. The problem of painting is the same. To try to get that two-dimensional surface to function as a three-dimensional visual experience is the important part, and doesn't matter if you're painting abstractly or realistically. The abstract part, for me, it's been fun to take some actual scenes from outside and redoing them in kind of abstract, put more expression into it, I guess. With expression, in my painting is a hard edge painting, so it's the expression of the space, of the form, of the volumes that create the painting. It isn't the expression like you would think expressionist, abstract expressionist, more a free kind of painting. Mine is more rigid. Andrea's is much freer, and mine's more on the rigid side. I'm more what you call neoplasticist, plasticity being the term of the creating that space and the form, and neo just being like Mondrian was, you know, to the extreme. Just that, just nothing really, no other things. But I've been bringing it. I mean, I'm not pure, you know, neoplasticist, because I use brush strokes, I modulate the paint, I do other things involved where they wouldn't probably do. So.
I guess I'm more lyrical, but with both of us, it's the color that determines our shapes, you know,
Right.
and George was always drawn to that very precise edge between hard, what's the word I'm looking for, hard edge abstraction. For many years, I tried to manipulate the abstractions with drawing and line, and James Gehagen said, you know, so many years ago, 50 years ago, let the color determine the shape. Well, I'm almost 70, and he was right, but I only kind of got around to that the last few years, and it seems to be becoming easier when I let the color determine the shape.
Color composition creates space, composition being the breakup of the planes on the surface, but also color creates space. So if you're a color abstractionist, you got to use both. You got to use the space as far as the analytical space, how the painting moves, as well as the colors which create a sense of space. So there's the dichotomy there as well. So that's part of painting abstractly.
Yeah, so you could have a composition with a lot of colors, and you could have a little bit of yellow that gives the appearance that it's way out in front, you know, just by it being yellow, you know, an intense yellow. And then you kind of got to balance that so the yellow doesn't stick out, and
Right.
maybe you have another color, maybe it's a dark color.
It's to try to maintain
You make
that
a dance.
two-dimensionality. If
You
you
make
try
it-
to, and you have a bright color like yellow, it's going to come off the picture plane. And so what do? And if you look at, there's no definite rule in any kind of art, but if you look at art history and you look back, whenever they used pure yellow, they always used a touch of white next to it. And white can go either way. You know, white can become a negative. But it's interesting that that is the way that in art history, if you look back at yellow as being how that force gets kind of pushed back or muted, it's with white.
And when we paint, we hope not just to compose on a two-dimensional surface. Like George said, we always hope that when people are looking at our paintings, there's always kind of like a feeling where you feel the space. Of course, the surface is flat, but it's the experience of depth that you're trying to convey. Yeah. So we want it to move not just in a flat space, but also to move in you know, three-dimensional space. And it does seem when I see a painting anywhere, you know, beautiful paintings out here right now that have that kind of tension, that is the one that not just gets me here, seems to, you know, have a physical effect. So that's what we're aiming for. And another shout out to James Gehagen. If anybody ever gets to see his paintings, man, his paintings have that effect. You know, they just move you.
We should mention that Jim was a student of Hans Hofmann.
A very well-known abstract.
Was more than a student, actually. You know, took care of his classes, moderated a lot of his classes and stuff, but was very close with Hofmann for a number of years. And thus introduced us to many other Hofmann students that we've met over the years through our connection with Jim and through our connection with the Vermont Studio Center. Because we've both been at the Vermont Studio Center pretty much since the concept in '85. Andrea and I moved into Johnson and started working for Vermont Studio Center. I worked for the center. She ran the art supply store at the center. Eventually she had her own art supply store. And I worked at the center for 30 years or something like that. Retired in 14, 13, some 13 I guess it was.
And with retirement, we are able to paint more. And with the pandemic, I painted a lot more. Yeah,
It's good.
Well, how do you always talk it as not as a life.
Yeah, it's lifestyle.
A lifestyle more than just a hobby or
Yeah, you know, we were very fortunate to have come across Vermont Studio Center. We were both working jobs, and we were in the ski area down in Waitsfield for a number of years. And then the Studio Center came around, and we connected with them, which was very fortunate on our part.
And they've had fabulous critics and residents come through in their their 35 years, and they're reopening in January. I mean, they've been going anyways because
they've been doing virtual.
But now they're going to reopen. And the amount of just people from all over the world and seeing their art is, I should say, what an influence that is, right? You know.
We were very fortunate. I mean, to be in kind of rural Vermont and have a community of artists from around the world be there with you for 30 some odd years. It's pretty amazing. Plus, we met a lot of Vermont artists because the Studio Center did a Vermont Artist Weeks at least once or twice a year for Vermont artists, and that's actually how I became associated with Vermont artists. In '85, I guess, or '84, I went to the first Vermont Artist Week, and that's how I connected.
And the Vermont artists, they're so incredible, and you just turned me on to another one today.
So I just wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about your experience as an artist, just living and working in Vermont.
Lucky to be at the Studio Center because I imagine that in a lot of small towns, especially if you're an abstract artist, like who do you see to keep you going? But here we were in this community where it's not weird to go do your work meaning painting. And so we were just so lucky. And I had an art supply store. I was known as the mean art lady. I had great deals, but I just, buy it. But we were lucky, and George met you were...
Yeah, we were lucky that way, and it's given us opportunities. I've had a number of shows in New York through my connections to the Studio Center. Yeah, it's been great as far as all that goes. But the funny thing is that the last 2 years the center's been closed, and we still paint. I mean, we still have the same kind of painting energy we always had. But I think it was good for the time when we were there. I mean, we paint anyway. I mean, it used to be you paint because other people were painting. You felt the energy of other people around you. But now we really haven't had that for 2 years, so we're kind of into that.
Well, by now, if we didn't have it going on, when were we? No, it was really great.
We also have a big house with 2 separate studios, and studios on opposite sides of the house, and that works out really well. It's because we have our own spaces. And,
the number of people coming through the Studio Center and their work ethic and what they were doing was mind-blowing. And as I said, it was the second really lucky thing, meeting Jim and Pat, and then being at the center. And so, it's been a good trip.
Is there anything else that you feel like you would like to share, or that you'd like to know?
How about in nature? What's the quote?
Which one? About color?
Yeah. In nature, color creates light.
No.
Okay.
In nature, light
creates color.
And in painting, color
creates light.
Yeah. So that's interesting.
Yeah.